is is to seek peace and disarmament. On the one hand, we have stored an unimaginable collective power of destruction, and behind the facades of the slums, an unsustainable individual power of destruction. When the finite resources become less, we shall be convinced that the reduction of the inventory of our poverty will go hand in hand with the reduction of the inventory of our weapons. This truth is so elementary that I'm almost ashamed to repeat it, as though this were inevitable. Our forebears buried without a thought civilizations and cultures such as the glorious ones of the Incas, the Mayas, and the Aztecs. But now it will no longer be the majestic territory of the Incas or of the Aztecs which we would destroy, but simply the modest empire of each person and his possibilities for happiness which are eroding. An old person in the twilight of his life, defenseless, sees the calm of his environment vanish. The young man without responsible family surroundings is belligerent and alien in a hostile world where he finds no answers to his concerns and needs. These subjects will not be the subject of books, as happened with the destruction of our major civilizations, because their humble sentimental empires are destroyed with leaving no trace. But what stands fast is the greatest challenge of our times. For the wealthier countries, doing away with the undesirable effects of industrialization, and for the emerging countries, building a modern civilization where habitat will be an instrument and the expression of the will to self-affirmation based on satisfying all human values and not only generating material wealth. I should like to leave with you the anxiety of our poet Andrés Eloy Blanco, who expressed his concern for the problems of man and his environment. He said, I quote, what peoples want is that the force of humanity have as an indispensable condition the humaneness of force. What peoples want is that the land be given to a sower of seeds, and to the sower the land he needs. What peoples want is security for the land where he builds his precarious home and uncertain hope. What peoples want is that their bread be as large as their hunger and their government have the shape of justice. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the governor of the Federal District of Caracas, Venezuela, and also wish him well in his responsibilities as chairman of our committee number 3. Before calling on the next speaker, I would like to remind the participants once again that in accordance with the decision of the conference, the list of speakers in the general debate will be closed at 6 p.m. today. Those wishing to participate but who have not inscribed themselves on the list are requested to do so as soon as possible. I now give the floor to the Vice Minister, the Federal Ministry of Technical Development and Investment of Czechoslovakia, His Excellency Mr. Pavel Majerski.
Monsieur le Président, Messieurs les délégués.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, permit me to express on behalf of the Czechoslovak government our warm appreciation of the initiative of the United Nations in convening this conference, which will contribute to the solution of the problems of human settlements and which will make it possible to strengthen and deepen peaceful relations among nations. We're fully aware from the outset that we must not prolong forever our theoretical discussions, but we must seek practical programs for the solution of problems of human settlements in the urban residential areas, especially in the developing countries, where the situation is the most serious. Because we must not repeat. We have only to look at past experience and to be familiar with the best principles for development that we can do this while still respecting the national customs of the country concerned. For the experience of Europe cannot be transferred to other countries without respect for their culture. Czechoslovakia, together with the other socialist countries, is one of the countries in which there is a systematic policy for the development of residential areas with a view to preventing what is called the global development problem of residential areas, and to introduce development in the national economy designed to improve the living conditions of the whole population. We don't intend in our audiovisual presentation to go into the details of building techniques, but we have tried to show typical models for the solution for the building and rebuilding of residential areas and the harmonious development of various districts, and the positive results which we have obtained for the problem which we had to resolve during the past 30 years of the development of our country. But we do propose to give an answer to a very serious question, the solution of which is the aim of the conference: how to prevent the exodus of populations towards the great urban centers. Like all other countries, we have our own specific difficulties which we must resolve. We find the solution to these problems in the cooperation of the socialist countries within the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance. These problems are interrelated. For example, the problems of overcoming poverty, which have been established in the 5-year plan, and which involves ensuring that every family has suitable housing and so on. Permit me to sketch briefly the situation in our country and to outline certain features of the housing building in the post-war period. And we're going to give more details in an audiovisual presentation. The Czechoslovak Socialist Republic is a country in the center of Europe, which has a long history and a large population living in a very small area. We have 150 inhabitants per square kilometer, for example. It is an industrially advanced country with a fairly standardized infrastructure, a number of architectural and historical sites. Because of these reasons and because of its geographical situation, it has been compelled rationally to manage its agriculture and its raw material resources and to protect its environment in areas of industrial concentration. The interrelationship of the development of human settlements and industry and agriculture, and the interrelationship of all vital processes, are facts which underlie our conception of our state as a single area. In what lies the exceptional character of the human settlements policy applied in Czechoslovakia since the war. Unlike many other countries, especially those in Africa, Asia, and South America, it has not been a question of building new residential areas, but of modernizing them. New building has taken place on the periphery of towns. Our building policy believes that there is no distinction between rich and poor areas. The people of the country and those of the towns have a similar standard of living, and we have overcome any profound differences in the standards of living on cultural standards in various districts. The sources of industrial and agricultural production and the planned distribution of productive capacity by the state, especially in the backward areas, have been one of the main tools in the building of satisfactory residential areas. This principle, which is being applied today, has enabled us to prevent the rural exodus and gradually to eliminate the social differences inherited from the past. The development plans, within the context of the National Development Plan, is sufficiently flexible to be adapted to developments in the future. The balance between the concentration of industries has led to the rational exploitation of the network of towns, so that many workers have remained in the rural areas because they have not been able to find work in the urban areas. Thus, we have avoided excessive emigration from the country, and we have improved the situation in the towns. We have 4 towns with more than 1 million population and many with over 500,000. These ambitious operations would be impossible without the long-term development plan based on a system of regional plans for the development of the country, which have specific reference to residential areas. I'm not saying that all the systems which we are applying in our housing policy during the past 30 years have universal application. But I am convinced that by logically combining long-term social programs while respecting all the aspects of the environment and environmental protection and trying to maintain the essential factors in the environment, we have acquired very practical experience which might be useful in all countries which are pursuing similar goals to those of Czechoslovakia. In a brief form and in an audiovisual presentation, we will describe our main efforts in the rural, urban and industrial sectors, the efforts which we are making to develop the country. And all this is an integral part of the development plan and is part of Czechoslovakia's policy with regard to human settlements. These examples, which the members of our delegation will develop in greater detail in the specialized committees of the conference, might serve as a positive inspiration in the formulation of essential principles of the documents of the conference. The policy of housing throughout the country, which is harmonized with industrial and agricultural development, the question of the profitability of the exploitation of economic resources, all would be far from satisfactory unless the human settlements policy guaranteed that the differences between town and country would no longer exist and that we would overcome the gap between rich and poor districts. But that we must base our policy on the universal human right of every human being to suitable accommodation. I thank you for your attention.
The Czechoslovak Socialist Republic in the heart of Europe. Czechoslovakia is a country with 1,000 years history, a federal republic of two fraternal nations, the Czechs and Slovaks, a country of ancient towns, castles and mansions with almost 40,000 government-protected historical monuments. Seen in the proportion of big countries, Czechoslovakia, with a total area of 128,000 square kilometers, is an urban region. With a population of almost 15 million, over 10,000 communities, 115 inhabitants to 1 square kilometer. Prague, the capital of the Czech Socialist Republic. Bratislava, capital of the Slovak Socialist Republic. The history of the country's major changes dates back to 1945. The government set forth a challenging program, leveling up the standard of living, raising the level of the formerly underdeveloped areas, leveling up the former differences between town and rural area by improved utilization of all the country's resources. The basic structure was provided by the planned industrialization of the whole country, above all the underdeveloped areas. New water resources resulted from a system of reservoirs and dams. Forest Conservancy conditioned the maintaining of water reserves and an ecological balance. Over 1/3 of the country's area is forest land. Industrialization was accompanied by the growth of collective large-scale farming throughout Czechoslovakia. The density of the population of Czechoslovakia necessitated ensuring a balanced development of housing construction and services in urban and rural areas, regional planning on a nationwide basis following a government program and the economic plans. Economically backward areas disappeared. The aim has been achieved to pull up living standards, to do away with basic differences between towns and rural areas, and to prevent the uncontrolled growth of sprawling megalopolises. Czechoslovakia is an urban region with a single 1 million metropolis and 5 cities with some 100,000 each. Czechoslovakia has maintained a sound balance of its settlements and preserved its natural beauty and historic relics.
Damos las gracias al señor viceministro del Ministerio Federal de Desarrollo Técnico e Inversiones de Checoslovaquia e invitamos a...
I thank the representative of Czechoslovakia and we invite the head of the delegation of the Central African Republic to address the meeting.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the delegation of the Central African Republic, which I have the great honor to lead, permit me, first of all, to inform you that because of the short time which is available to us, I will not go into great details or to express my delegation's congratulations in detail. But I should like to inform you that my country, the Central African Republic, which has already actively participated in the preparations and Stockholm meetings and has made its modest contribution to the preparatory meetings for Habitat, There's great hopes in the decisions and recommendations which will arise from our meeting. In the Central African Republic, my government's experience under the leadership of John Bedell Bokassa, the President for Life and father of the Central African Republic, is very encouraging, and the participation of the population in human settlements programs is of primary importance. The father of the Central African Republic has taken a decision to make the people more aware by means of a message which I will quote to you in part here. My desire is that the Vancouver Conference, the first of its kind in the history of mankind, should not only be crowned with a great but ephemeral success, but should achieve results which are quantifiable, materially appreciable, in order that throughout the world, especially in the third world, there should shortly be an improvement in the condition of human settlements and in the quality of life. It goes without saying that this statement, Mr. President and distinguished delegates, was supported by extensive publicity throughout the country, and thus that the people of the Central African Republic expects happy news from Vancouver. In the field of human settlements, the Central African Republic has been regrouping villages in rural areas and establishing all the necessary services there. Under the appropriate agenda item, my delegation will make suitable comments. The example of slums in the rich countries, the problem of rural exodus, health problems, psychological problems and others, give us an obligation to attack this evil during our work. The conference must insist that any project for human settlements should be guided by administrative, organizational and legislative standards. In the field of health, since the quality of life is a problem of welfare and a problem of health, it's desirable for the developing countries to give high priority to drinking water supply and the hygienic disposal of wastes in order at a given date to attain qualitative and quantitative results. And my government is taking into account the following points that concern our country: its geographical situation, which influences its social and economic development, the land laws, which make it possible to ensure the rational use of land and to avoid real estate speculation, and it has adopted the law on the national domain, which gives the government the right to take over vacant lots and makes the use of land by investments more flexible. Urbanization, which defines urban services, zoning, cultural areas, industrial zones. Another point to take into account is one of the best forms of guaranteeing international mutual assistance and to make it more effective with regard to human settlements would be for the United Nations to become more active in this field. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, the Central African delegation wishes you great inspiration and every success in your conference, and I thank you for your attention.
Damos las gracias al Ministro de Obras Públicas, Planificación Urbana y Transportes Fluviales y Terrestres de la República.
Thank the Minister for Public Services of the Central African Republic, and I now give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
President, Mr. Secretary General, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and ladies and gentlemen. This Habitat Conference comes at a very crucial period in the history of the world. Despite the tremendous progress made in the fields of science and technology, and despite our efforts to provide our people with a decent life, the effects of all our efforts have not as yet reached the majority of mankind. All over the world, we see indications that all is not well in our settlements. More people than ever before are poor, hungry, and often without adequate shelter and other basic facilities and services in life. More and more people in many developing countries continue to drift from stagnated rural areas to the urban areas, adding to the strain on the basic services in towns to nearly busting limits and adding to unemployment problems. In Kenya, the basic cause of human settlement problems is a rapid growth in population. The rate of annual population increase grew from 3.2% between 1948 and 1962 to approximately 3.5% today. The main causes of this accelerated rate are the remarkable advances in public health and an overall improvement in the standard of living. These have caused a decline in the death rate, especially of children, while the birth rate has remained more or less constant. The population will continue to grow from 13 million in 1975 to around 16 million in 1980, and depending, amongst other factors, on the rate of decrease of fertility, to between 28 million and 34 million by the year 2000. In urban settlements of the country, the pressing need is for an increase in the numbers and quality of housing to meet the accelerating demand stimulated by the rural to urban migration, which in the case of Nairobi City now stands at the rate of 7% per annum. The basic problems affecting rural housing conditions are the accelerating rate of population growth, the increasing volume of rural-urban migration, scarcity of financial resources, and the widening gap between the rural and urban incomes. Mr. President, we are assembled here to advance one of the most important enterprises in the history of the world, to chart a course by which the quality of life for all the people of the world will be enhanced by affording mankind security, a sense of well-being, and the right to enjoy human dignity, which is every person's birthright. Here we have an excellent opportunity for the first time since Stockholm to come together from various parts of the world in order that we may exchange ideas on specific human settlement problems and those of the environment generally. The fact that nearly all the countries within the United Nations system have produced over 200 audiovisual presentations for screening at this conference, showing the solutions they have found to various human settlement problems, is an indication, in my view, of the international commitment to the improvement of man's habitat. We have brought to this conference our national report on Kenya's human settlement strategies, as well as 3 films demonstrating our efforts to improve the quality of life for our own people, in the firm belief that some of our experiences will be useful to others facing similar problems to the ones we have tackled. In the same spirit, we look forward to exchanging views and ideas with other delegations on the solutions they have found to some of the problems facing all of us. During preparations for this conference, some governments in developing countries have been enabled to bring their experiences in the form of these audiovisual presentations by some of the developed countries. And we believe that this conference should foster and encourage even greater cooperation in the whole field of human settlements. At Stockholm, the international community realized that human settlement problems could only be solved adequately by adopting a comprehensive approach. It was realized that the interplay of rural stagnation, rural to urban migration, and unplanned neighborhoods in urban areas were related, and that they were major factors in the decline in the quality of life. It is befitting, therefore, that the first principle of the Stockholm Conference should start with the declaration that, and I quote, "Man has the fundamental right to freedom, equality, and adequate conditions of life in an environment of equality that permits a life of dignity and well-being," I unquote. I think this should guide us as we consider the declaration of principles before us. In our view, document A/Conf/70/4 on Declaration of Principles should be seen as an elaboration of the Stockholm Declaration. The Declaration of Principles should give hope to mankind that something can be done to improve living conditions in human settlements. We consider, too, that there should be a balance between principles for national action and recommendations for international cooperation. Even more important for us are the recommendations for action enunciated at Stockholm. The first recommendation for action states that the planning, improvement, and management of rural and urban settlements demands an approach at all levels which embraces all aspects of human environment, both natural and man-made. It is in this spirit that the second recommendation proceeded to the decision that a conference and demonstration on experimental human settlements should be held under the auspices of the United Nations in order to provide for coordination and the exchange of information and to demonstrate to world public opinion the potential of this approach by a display of experimental projects. On recommendations for national action, we are in agreement with the view that human settlements should be seen as a dynamic process which is part and parcel of the national developmental goals. Policies for human settlement should therefore be incorporated in the national development plans. In Kenya, we have made attempts towards this goal by including a number of chapters, not only on sectoral aspects of human settlements such as housing, water, transportation, health and educational services, but also on the general conceptual framework of rural development and urban growth. Our national human settlements policy is the outcome of a comprehensive social planning strategy within which the two principal planning agencies order their own priorities. The successful development of towns and rural areas demands a coordinated process for planning, decision-making, financing, implementing, and administering a wide variety of services and infrastructure. From our own experiences, we are convinced that review of our policies is necessary. To this end, we have started consideration for the preparation of our fourth development plan starting 1978 on to 82, so as to ensure the improvements on chapters dealing with human settlements and the environment in general in order to meet the needs of our people. Mr. President, we are in agreement with the observation that many human settlements have degenerated to the present poor state due to the low priority accorded to them in the past. We believe, therefore, that human settlements should receive adequate priority in budgetary and other resource allocations. In spelling out clear goals for improvement of human settlements, it is necessary that all resources available should be harnessed. This, in our experience, calls for frank dialogue between policymakers, the professionals, and we believe the people themselves. On settlement planning, our experience has been that even when a country has a decentralization policy, industrial development has continued to be located in the more favored major towns. This is partly due to practices and requirements, I fear, of foreign companies which favor larger urban centers. While this could also imply a lack of adequate political commitment to the decentralization policy, it is necessary for this conference to come out with a message for major international investors and financiers who could, by their actions, hinder the attainment of nationally desirable goals for human settlements. We believe that the challenge of planning is to provide shelter which would provide dignity to the individual and enhance his status in society, giving him privacy and security and a sense of belonging to the community. This, in our experience, encourages physical well-being of the population with concomitant beneficial effect on the country's economy as a whole. These factors make a vital contribution to the welfare and stability of a nation. Turning now to the proposed program for international cooperation since Stockholm, it has become increasingly clear that the issues of human settlements cut across cultural and ideological differences. A shantytown is the same all over the world. The names we might give may range from favelas to slums to ghettos and planned settlements and so on, but I believe we are all trying to say the same thing, namely that the quality of life for people living in such settlements is inadequate according to established standards and criteria. As you will recall, Mr. President, in the spirit of Stockholm, the environment is indivisible. We cannot, in the view of my delegation, and I know this is the view of most of the governments we have consulted with, divorce the issues of the natural environment from issues of the man-made environment. As a result of the accumulated knowledge gained by UNEP through the whole preparatory process for the conference and the fact that UNEP has operational programs for human settlements, we consider that UNEP should assume greater responsibility in the field of human settlements. Noting that through the untiring efforts of the Executive Director of UNEP, substantial progress has been made in the program for the natural environment, we consider that the Habitat Conference should give further guidance on how to tackle issues related to the man-made environment in the spirit we adopted the first and basic recommendation of Stockholm. This, in our view, will complete the environmental picture and thereby complete the work we started 4 years ago in Stockholm. This brings me to the question of the kind of institutional arrangements we should set up to promote international cooperation in the field of human settlements. The view of my delegation is that such institutional arrangements should take into account the following. First, the fact that the General Assembly of the United Nations has already vested UNEP with the authority over human settlements. Secondly, it should take into account the need for rationalization of the relationship between the two components of the human environment in such a way as to give impetus to national and international cooperation in these fields. Without endeavoring to describe the composition, structure, and terms of reference of such a body, we would see this as an offshoot of UNEP in the same way as the World Food Programme operates vis-à-vis the Food and Agriculture Organization. Mr. President, now that the United Nations Habitat and Human Settlement Foundation is operational, we consider that the foundation currently under UNEP should be the pivot around which we can build a new momentum in conjunction with other agencies dealing with matters related to human settlements within this organizational framework. The mandate of the foundation, as approved by the General Assembly, covers the following areas. A, facilitating the transfer of financial assistance to institutions and governments from the foundation's own and broad spectrum of other sources mobilized both internally and externally. B, the stimulation of innovative approaches to pre-investment, pre-project, and financing strategies for habitat and human settlement projects, drawing on accumulated practical experience in both the public and private sectors. And C, organizing technical assistance services in human settlement and habitat management, including training and project development, and promoting adaptation and transfer of appropriate scientific and technical knowledge in human settlement projects related to housing finance policies, information systems, and management. As you will recall, therefore, Mr. President, in addition to its responsibility for executing activities funded from its own resources, the Foundation was envisaged by the Economic and Social Council in its resolution 1914 Roman 57 to be an executing agency for the United Nations Development Program, assisted projects in the field of its own competence. Without elaborating further on this matter, it is clear to us that in the Foundation, we have a body within the United Nations system which meets the criteria we are looking for to facilitate cooperation in the field of human settlements. Besides, the program envisaged in document A/Conf 70/6, paragraphs 32 to 77, which we find quite comprehensive, is within the mandate of the Foundation. In the view of my delegation, this will also ensure that there shall not be any hiatus between the decisions and recommendations which this conference will adopt and implement. I'm afraid that it's not possible to finish all the speech, but I'll hand over the rest of it to us. Thank you.
Damos las gracias al señor ministro de Relaciones.
I thank Minister of Kenya, and I'm sorry that he wasn't able to finish his statement. The Minister for Public Works, Urban Planning and Transport of Senegal, Madame Mamadou Diop, has the floor.
But I wanted the delegates at this committee also to be aware of it, because it has its influence.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates,
Some of the
the Senegalese delegation
that has been put forward here
would like to take this opportunity
will be distributed
to present to this august body
to delegates
to illustrate our statement two films. The first dealing with urban settlements and the second with rural settlements. First of all, you will see the film which deals with urban settlements. The interpreter cannot hear the French text of the film.
These houses have a relatively low quality. To this end, our policies are geared
4 million inhabitants. The capital, Dhaka, the largest town in the Republic, will be a reference city for studying human settlements in Senegal.
to show a concern regarding the provision of a higher quality housing for these groups
The increase in schooling is a result of improvement in health services. But this has given rise to certain problems. The building of hotels and flats has been carried out largely by the private sector with the assistance of the banks. With regard to the urban settlements, most of the financing is borne by the state. An assessment of 3% of salaries of workers is used for the provision of basic service. In housing, we must take into account living habits. People do not wish to live in high-rise buildings, for example. External aid has enabled us to ease the burden on the nation. And we sometimes forget the importance of the struggle against pollution and our efforts to ensure a suitable level of food and to make the population aware of the problems of pollution. The reality of the areas inhabited by uneducated workers will suffer seriously from diseases has caused serious problems in these areas. During the past 10 years, we have taken original ways of solving these problems. We have been rehabilitating villages, equipping them with electricity and other services. The social services provided by the state are adapting the people to their new environment. With the new buildings, the quality of life is increasing. And this is a model example of organizing the urban habitat and will be used in the other parts of Senegal as a model.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, it was since the United Nations Conference on the Environment, which was held at Stockholm in 1972, that the decision was taken by the countries of the international community to organize an international conference on human settlements. We must note that since that conference, the situation with regard to human settlements in the world has not significantly improved, in particular in the countries of the Third World, where the population explosion, due in part to the improvement of the conditions, to the health conditions of the people, led to the urbanization of towns and to some extent has tended to undermine the efforts made to improve urban conditions. Thus, 25 years ago, 16 towns of the Third World had 1 million inhabitants or more. And today there are more than 60, and in 25 years there will be more than 200. This intensive urbanization gives rise to problems of housing, transport, employment, health services, education, water supply, disposal of wastewaters, protection of property, social security, with which the developing countries cannot cope with the desirable effectiveness. For if we have an increase in production in the order of 5 to 10% a year in these countries, the number of jobs is increasing at scarcely more than 3 to 4%, while manpower is growing at between 4 and 5%. Thus, there is a genuine crisis of human settlements, represented above all by the impossibility of making up the deficit in housing, in particular for the most disadvantaged social groups. In Senegal, a cursory analysis of the development of the urban population shows that in 1960, 22% of the total population lived in towns. In 1970, 30% of this population was living in 16 concentrations of more than 10,000 inhabitants. With a total population of some 4.5 million people and an overall growth rate of 2.9% per year, in the year 2000, Senegal will have a population of more than 9 million people, 59% of which will live in urban concentrations. In other words, 1 out of every 2 Senegalese will live in town. These figures, while underlying a speedy population growth, show the need for finding specific solutions and to provide the population with the essential shelter and services to which it has a right within the framework of an overall policy for the development of the country. This policy involved, at the time of the preparation of our National Economic and Social Development Plan, of a national commission and regional commissions in the field of urbanism, human settlements, which brought together central and local governments and the private sector in defining objectives and establishing programs and adopting the measures necessary for their application. Thus, the 5th Economic and Social Development Plan, which is being prepared, has determined the following objectives in the sector of urban planning. Firstly, to guarantee decent housing for the largest possible number of people. Secondly, to structure towns and seek to harmonize the various functions which are housing, work, travel, leisure, physical and mental development, by incorporating them in the national plan. The establishment of this important program for the development of settlements necessarily demanded the establishment of management structures in this field. My government established, immediately after independence, state societies which were to carry out the policy defined by the government with regard to human settlements. Between 1960 and 1972, The Senegalese state, through these institutions, built more than 20,000 dwellings for an investment in the order of 20 billion CFA francs, which is $100 million. To this total, we must add the equipment of 10,000 lots of land, which has made it possible to rehouse more than 100,000 people whose modest income did not enable them to buy better housing. During recent years, the efforts of the Senegalese government has done much to satisfy the problems of housing by stressing housing for the largest possible number and on a policy of systematic rehousing in planned areas. Thus, a project of equipped lots of land, financed jointly by Senegal and the World Bank and carried out by the OHLM, and the equipment of 447 hectares, or in other words 14,000 lots, was recently initiated. Another project deals with 100 hectares, and this was also initiated with the help of the World Bank in the interior. This program will be extended to the whole of the country. It must be noted, moreover, that the development strategy for human settlements in Senegal gives great importance to the equipment and development of rural areas. This priority is justified by the fact that 80% of our population lives in rural settlements, and intervention in these zones should contribute to improving the quality of life and to slowing down the exodus towards the capital, which is running at the rate of 15 to 20,000 a year. In this connection, the government has established a vast rural program and a new rural settlements policy. The past policy has been designed to improve the traditional peasant habitat. This intervention sometimes met with failure due mainly to the lack of familiarity with the social and economic conditions in the country. This is the development program for human settlements, which was planned and carried out by Senegal. We are, of course, aware of the difficulties which the developing countries might meet with in applying such a large program. This is why the establishment of an international cooperation policy in the field of human settlements has become a priority necessity. This cooperation must take place both at the regional and at the international level. First of all, at the regional level, the countries of the Third World, those of the African continent in particular, must strengthen the national links of solidarity which exist among them and provide for more frequent meetings to establish coordinated programs. Such meetings are essential with regard to the training of personnel and in such fields as architecture, urban planning, and those of the environment. Thus, the training institutes in the field of human settlement should be set up on a regional or sub-regional basis in regions having a similar environment where the problems also are similar. At the international level, the cooperation in the field of human settlements must be more dynamic and provide for the solution of the difficult problems of the financing of housing. A great effort must be made at the national level to find realistic solutions to these problems, but it must be recognized that these efforts, in the majority of cases, remain marginal in comparison with the scope of the problem in this field. Thus, my delegation, while welcoming here the establishment of the United Nations Fund for Human Settlements, which was established at the 29th session of the General Assembly, thinks that this fund should become operational very quickly and intervene in the direct financing of national human settlements programs or help the international financial institutions to grant loans through national or international banks. For many adequate programs have been conceived by the developing countries in the fields of human settlements, but the major obstacle remains financing. With regard to the problem of structures, the Senegalese delegation, while endorsing the position of the Organization of African Unity, which lies in the establishment of an autonomous institution within the United Nations responsible for the management of human settlements, would nevertheless like to recall here the position which it has always had. In conclusion, Mr. President, we would merely like to stress that we support, on the whole, the main points of the Declaration of Principles proposed for the attention of the conference, and we give to this new conception its deserved place in the world economic context, which is designed to increase production and profitability.
Yes. Oh, but I'm sorry. I must pardon the distinguished delegate, but because of the time limit imposed on others, it will have to be shown in the presentation center. I apologize for cutting in on His Excellency, but the time allocation is the same for all delegates, and the capsules count as part of that time. It will then be available in the presentation center.
Okay.
I wish to thank His Excellency Mr. Mamadou Diop, Minister of Public Works of Senegal.
You represent one council.
I now give the floor to the Deputy Prime Minister of Thailand, His Excellency Major General Praman Adaraksan.
Mr. President, may I, on behalf of the Thai delegation and myself, join ourselves with the previous distinguished delegate in congratulating you for being unanimously elected to the presidency of this historic and, indeed, one of the most important conferences sponsored by the United Nations. At the same time, I would like to extend our congratulations to the other distinguished members who have been elected to the various offices of this august body. Please allow me to congratulate the Secretary General of the conference, Mr. Enrique Penalosa, and his staff, for the highly commendable work in preparing this conference. I think that all will agree with me that we should also congratulate the United Nations Environment Program for its success in implementation of this important outcome of the Stockholm Conference. May I also take this opportunity to thank the Canadian government for their generosity and hospitality that enabling us to conduct our deliberation amongst the beauty and wonderful environment of Vancouver, which is itself an extraordinary example of what human settlements can become. Mr. President, before I discuss Thailand's case with respect to human settlement, please let me say a few words about my general impression concerning the topic. To our Thai people, the basic philosophy of the habitat has been a part of our life for a long time. Some of you may know that, according to Lord Buddha's teaching, an essential element of the four basic means of human need for livelihood is shelter, while the other three are food, medicine, and clothing. Therefore, it is quite natural for us to support fully this conference on human settlements. The Thai government and people are highly interested in the works of habitat and the problems of settlements, as we are presently grappling with them and trying to solve some of these problems ourselves. We, as well as other people all over the world, are waiting for the results of the habitat, which hopefully will help us to improve the present approach to human settlement and environment problems. It is also our hope that the success of this conference will help us to realize in a much shorter time and with less difficulty what we have been trying to achieve for years. During the past year, human settlements and environmental problems, both in rural